We are moving on to our next story, and this is about the banking collapse. So Russell Brand interviewed Gary Stevenson recently, and he's going to talk about the banking crisis and, more importantly, who actually benefits. But I noticed something with this interview. Gary Stevenson comes across as he doesn't seem to be as concerned about the banking issue that's going on right now. But I'm going to show you an article from the Financial Times, which actually was sent to me earlier this morning, kind of debunking what Gary Stevenson is saying, in the sense that it's not something we should worry about when we look at 2008. So I want to get started with this interview here with Russell Brand. Now, the name of this video is called The Banking Collapse. Gary Stevenson exposes who really benefits. I want you to pay attention to what Gary Stevenson says, because again, the impression that I got from this interview is that he doesn't really think this is as scary and as crazy as people are making it out to be. But like I said, I have some information that says something different compared to what Gary Stevenson is saying, and I think we need to look at both sides. Let's go ahead and get right into it.
Did you notice during the pandemic that there was a massive wealth transfer? Did you know that America minted a new billionaire every day? Are you suspicious about this latest banking crisis and whether or not taxpayers will ultimately end up footing the bill? Is there something systemically wrong with our financial systems? Hello there, you 6 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom. If you're not a subscriber to our channel, subscribe right now. Turn on that notification bell. It's the only way you can guarantee getting this information daily, because the algorithm will direct you into the arms of the mainstream. Have you noticed how we're lurching from one crisis, from war, pandemic, now into another financial crisis, and that these crises present opportunities to elite systems? Let me know if you agree in the chat and the comments. I spoke to Gary Stevenson, the man I call the Del Boy of the Dow Jones, a Cockney commentator on financial matters, who told me that what you intuitively understand is actually what's happening, that these systems do generate the possibility for wealth transfer and do exploit crisis. It's a fantastic conversation. Stay all the way to the end, because you're going to be even smarter by the end of it. You're going to learn a whole lot more about things that they make deliberately obscure and opaque to prevent you from understanding them. Can you tell us, please, what's been going on with all this hullabaloo? Is it like the last one, the 2008 one? Is it up? Will taxpayers end up inadvertently round the block, round the back, paying for it in some sort of way? And also, how do they keep doing these things? What are they doing? I know it's something to do with interest rates went up by 4.5% and they bought these bonds and it all went wrong. So just give us stuff so that we can understand it and then resent it and attack it.
Okay, so notice he asked him, is it similar to '08? Just keep that thought in the back of your mind.
All right, so I'll start with your first question. Is this going to be like 2008? Markets are still concerned that this could spread. It's unlikely, but possible. Most likely it will be kept to this one bank, Silicon Valley Bank. There's worries about Credit Suisse today, which is a much, much bigger bank. Probably it won't happen. We have to hope it won't happen, because if it does happen, it'll be a disaster for everyone. Let's assume it stays just within this one bank, Silicon Valley Bank. If that happens, the banking system will survive and ordinary people will not be massively affected. And the reason for that is it's only one bank going under. And the loss, which sits with Silicon Valley Bank, will be spread throughout the whole of society, and everyone will pay a few dollars. I think the way that it has been communicated has been pretty misleading. We've been told it's not a bailout, and essentially nobody will pay. If there's a loss, somebody has to pay it. In this case, they don't just disappear. In this case, basically, anyone who has a bank account will pay a little bit more over the next few years, and that will be how it will be socialized. I think the most interesting thing is the point that you make, basically, about, in many ways, this is a repeat of 2008, in the sense that the banking system itself, and in this case, Silicon Valley Bank, most of the deposit holders are venture capitalists, big businesses, wealthy people. They are going to be protected, and the loss will be socialized.
That piece right there, I think, is very important. The venture capitalists, those people will be protected. Also, the billionaires, of course, some multimillionaires. Those people really won't lose much. Billionaire losing $25,000, even $200,000 doesn't hit them in the way that you think that it would. They're billionaires for a reason. They're still exploiting off of people, and they're still making money while they're losing money. So that's important to keep in mind. But who really benefits from this system? They are not going to suffer the way that the average American will. And I mean, when I say average American, in reference to the billionaires and the venture capitalists, I'm even talking about people who are doctors and lawyers, because even they don't make as much as those people do. So you have to understand, when these banking catastrophes happen, those people, for the most part, are still very much protected. Let's look back at Silicon Valley banking collapse. One of the things that we remember, what did they say? We had to protect the people who had deposits of what, $250,000, right? At least $250,000. Okay, so your average Joe Schmo doesn't have those deposits of $250,000. So they, even with the Silicon Valley banking collapse, they sought to protect the wealthy. They sought to protect their funds, their interests, their investments, not those who were making less than that 255 or deposited less than that 255K. So that's important for people to understand. So if you weren't making a deposit of at least that amount, they really weren't caring about you, basically, to make a long story short. That's basically what that means. They weren't trying to worry about trying to protect your investments. They were only trying to make sure they protected the investments of the ultra rich.
For me, what I think is most interesting is the way that this reminds me of actually the mismanagement of the COVID economic crisis, and the way that our society mismanages economic crises in general, which is, as soon as the crisis hits, wealthy people can contact the government and they can protect themselves, and ordinary people are not protected. Go for it.
That right there in itself is a problem. First of all, that's kind of funny. He put up the sign that says, please, can I talk now? But that right there in itself is a problem. Why is it that wealthy people have access to government officials like that? That shouldn't be the case. Ordinary people who are their constituents, we don't have access to those politicians like that. And some of us are the ones who canvass for them. So just keep that in mind. Some of the things that he's saying here, I feel, are pretty revealing. Oh, yeah, well, wealthy people, they'll just contact the government and they can just contact them just like that.
Nice one, mate. Thanks for respecting the sign. I like what you said about the COVID pandemic and the mismanagement of the financial aspects of that. Oh, yeah, I am talking. Sorry about that, mate. But I wanted to point out that we are still on YouTube and we are bound by their guidelines. In a minute, we'll click over onto being Rumble, where we can just speak freely and say whatever the hell we like. So I just wanted to alert you to the fact that we have to nimbly, like linguistic Nijinsky's, trap our way through the guidelines that are set by the WHO that YouTube and their parent company Alphabet adhere to. So you're saying, mate, that this is yet another example of creating financial conditions that are beneficial to elites, or at least are not punitive to the elites, while punishing ordinary people, even if not directly. So when Joe Biden goes, our taxpayers won't pay this, what does he mean really, mate?
It's an example of a management of a crisis in such a way that the rich are protected. And the communication given to ordinary people is that nobody will pay the cost. And I think the best example of this is at the beginning of COVID. Do you know how much money the US government has given out since the start of COVID? How much money they're giving out in total? It's $8 trillion. That is $24,000 for every man, woman, child, and baby in the US. So if there's a family out there, family of 5, mum, dad, 3 kids, if they don't have an extra $24,000 each, someone else has got it. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were going to give out $8 trillion, I would think I should do an analysis of who's going to end up with that money. But was that analysis done?
I'm guessing that's one of your rhetorical questions.
The most important thing there to take away from what he was just saying is that the rich are protected. Do you believe me now when I say we have a class war? Because poor people are not protected. What's left of the middle class is not protected. And working class people are not protected. Rich people are. And this is where our frustration should be focused, right? We should be focusing our frustration not so much on red team, blue team, but on the elites, the people who have all this money, the people who buy up everything, who own everybody. Someone asked me the other day, they're like, did you hear? Walmart is closing stores. That sucks for them. No, it doesn't. Sorry. It doesn't suck for them. I don't feel bad for the Waltons one bit. That family has a lot of money. They'll be okay. I think it's getting to a point where more businesses are starting to crumble and more businesses are starting to cave. Bed Bath & Beyond filed for bankruptcy. Walmart closing stores. You're going to see more of this. David's Bridal also closing stores. You don't need to feel sorry. Do not feel sorry for these families that have had generations of super wealth. The Waltons will be okay.
Seeing your style now. You're using rhetorical questions. You're a skinhead using rhetorical questions.
No analysis was done. No analysis was done of who ends up with that money.
Done some analysis, Gary. It's standard procedure.
Well, you won't be surprised to know I've done some analysis where I'm from. We pride ourselves on understanding things fully. Listen, the reason that money was needed is because the spending of the rich collapsed, all right? If you're an ordinary person, what are your expenditures? Rent, mortgage, food, bills. During COVID, you're still paying them. If you're a very wealthy person, luxury holidays, going to the theatre, going to bars, you probably know about that kind of stuff, Russell.
I'm self-made.
Those expenditures couldn't be made, which meant the spending of the rich collapsed. It was replaced by the spending of the government, which means the government pays your wages, you pay your bills, you pay your mortgage, it goes to a rich person and he can't spend it. $8 trillion funneled through ordinary people to the rich. Now, what do you think will happen? That's $24,000 per person. So that goes to the rich. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, same in the UK, to all of the richest people in the country. What do you think will happen if in a period where the economy is closed, we give hundreds of thousands of dollars or pounds to all of the richest people in the country? When you reopen, you'll have inflation and a cost of living crisis. It was obvious. And if you don't believe me, go look at my YouTube. In June 2020, I predicted massive increase in inequality, massive increase in inflation and a cost of living crisis, because that is what happens when you massively increase inequality. And people need to understand that when crises happen, we need to start looking at them through the lens of inequality. Who wins and who loses?
And poor people always lose. Doesn't matter if the president is a Republican or a Democrat. At the end of the day, when we have a crisis, poor people always lose. Working class people always lose. Rich people are okay. He brought up the pandemic, something I want you to think about. At the height of the pandemic, did you notice how certain celebrities and other rich people, they were able to obtain resources to protect themselves that the rest of us had no access to? They were able to get those N95 masks. When I went to look for them, there was nothing to be found. Whether it was online, whether it was in the stores, the ones that were open, there was nothing to be found. But somehow they got them. Any crisis, it will be this way.
I like it. My favourite bit was the bit where Gary goes, and if you don't believe me, right, you can ask my mum, because she's seen me do that analysis, blood. That was my favourite bit. Mate, what about Julian Assange's thing, that the function of government is to take money from public hands and to pass it into the private sector, whether that's through military action, exploitation of crisis, or even in economic situations like this one, look for opportunities?
I think if you look at the last 3 years, that is definitely what they have done. There's a question of why they did it, whether they knew they were going to do it. So I worked in finance for a long time, and I've studied economics. I went to London School of Economics, went to Oxford. From my observation of wealthy people who understand economics, I suspect they probably did it by accident. Because I think what it is a mixture of greed and stupidity. They know what they want is to protect their interests. As long as they're protected, that's all they care about. So they go in. I think this SVB example is great. It's a great example because straight away, these guys on the phone to the government, bail us out, get your bailout. Nobody talks about who wins, who loses. You know, I think at the beginning of COVID, we had such an amazing example of that. We are so privileged to have witnessed such an example of mass elite stupidity, right? £700 billion, $8 trillion given out. Nobody in the mainstream media said who ends up with that money. It's a simple question.
Very, very simple question. Who ended up with that money? This is very key. Very key. Look at all the people that lost their jobs, all the businesses that had to permanently close, especially in states like mine that Massachusetts was shut down, right? Like, look at all those mom and pop, like small businesses that had to close permanently, all those people that were unemployed. Where did all that money go to? Where did it all go? Meanwhile, you had CEOs, their wealth doubled during the pandemic. Some of these CEOs were making bank while they were busy laying people off. And people, when they were laid off, people, when they lost their jobs, they lost their health insurance. And some of these CEOs were making bank, guys. You have to understand that. This is something I've seriously stressed when we talk about the wealth inequality in this country. We had a pandemic, we had a crisis in this country, and you had all these people who had lost their jobs, some people who lost their homes, some people who were evicted from their apartments. And meanwhile, you had CEOs of these companies that were giving themselves extra bonuses that were doubling their wealth, while the people below them, their employees, were struggling just to pay rent. And more people should have called that out. No, but people wanted to listen to Bill Gates, who's not even a freaking medical doctor, for God's sake. Let's go on.
Simple question, right? And that money is in the bank accounts of rich people now. And now we have a cost of living crisis for ordinary people, but ordinary people can't afford, in many cases, to feed their kids at the same time as the biggest and fastest ever increase in millionaire and billionaire wealth. The average US billionaire doubled their wealth in the first 1 year of COVID. The average UK billionaire increased their wealth by £630 million in 1 year. And yet here we are now, where ordinary people in many cases can't heat their homes, can't feed their kids, and we're talking about it like there's no money. What ordinary people need to start thinking, when there's a crisis, when your cost of living falls, please, please, God, look at the rich and say, is it falling for them as well?
That's right. That's right. Let's go back a little bit. When you have these questions, he said, look at the rich and see, is it doing this? Are they going through the same experience as well?
And we're talking about it like there's no money. What ordinary people need to start thinking, when there's a crisis, when your cost of living falls, please, please, God, look at the rich and say, is it falling for them as well? If your life is getting worse and their life is getting better, probably what's happening is inequality is increasing. If you look at the statistics, that is what's happened here.
It's a brilliant lens to provide, mate, because it does seem like the very definition of a wealth transfer, an energy crisis that leads to profitability for energy companies, even though they receive them subsidies, a financial crisis that appears to somehow or another benefit financial elites, wars that benefit the military-industrial complex, medical crisis that benefit the pharmaceutical industry. Before you know it, crisis becomes the state that most benefits the elite, so crisis for ordinary people becomes de rigueur. Well, that was a fantastic...
That's right. This is very important. And I want to add this as well. And then I'm going to show you what the Financial Times said in reference to the banking crisis. I think it's important for us to seriously sit back and think about this for a second. While people were struggling to pay for groceries, and some people still are, Bill Gates was buying farmland. Pass that on to your friends. While people were are struggling still to pay for groceries, Bill Gates is buying farmland. Write that down. Now, the Financial Times, they did have something to say about this banking crisis. Now, this was sent to me earlier this morning. They said depositors pulled nearly $60 billion from 3 U.S. banks as Apple raises pressure. And there's one piece here that I want to point to, especially with a company like State Street. Let me go to here. Here we go. Big U.S. financial groups, Charles Schwab, State Street, and M&T suffered almost $60 billion in combined bank deposit outflows in the first quarter as customers continued to move their money in search of higher returns. The deposit flight has been turbocharged by the collapse last month of Silicon Valley Bank and 2 other U.S. lenders, with cash moving out of bank accounts at a pace not seen since the aftermath of the '08 financial crisis. And that's why I told you, he said he didn't think it'd be that it's not as bad as the '08 housing crisis. The Financial Times disagrees. Maybe some of the, economists, maybe they don't want to scare people, but I remember them not wanting to scare people in '08 too. But this is coming from the Financial Times. Not seen since the aftermath of the '08 financial crisis. Very important. U.S. savers have been yanking cash out of low-yielding bank accounts and plowing it into alternative products such as money market funds or treasury bills that pay better returns, allowing them to take advantage of the sharp interest rate rises implemented by the Federal Reserve. The average U.S. bank account savings rate is just at 0.37%, according to government data, versus the Fed's benchmark rate of 4.75% to 5%. Schwab on Monday said deposits fell 11% or 41 billion in the first quarter and 30% year on year to 325.7 billion. Custody Bank State Street's total deposits fell 5% in the first quarter to 224 billion, more than expected. And the group told analysts that another 4 billion to 5 billion of outflows of non-interest bearing deposits could leave in the second quarter. M&T Bank reported total deposits had declined 3% from 163.5 billion at the end of 2022 to 159.1 billion. The deposit flows reported in first quarter earnings herald an anxious start to a week when dozens of regional and mid-sized banks are due to announce their results, providing a fuller picture of the damage wrought by the failure last month of SVB and other lenders. Last but not least, last week, some of the biggest U.S. banks, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup, announced they had raked in billions of dollars in deposits from customers fleeing smaller lenders following SVB's collapse. State Street shares closed down more than 9% in New York after quarterly profits missed expectations and fees were hit by reduced assets under management in its investment arm. It's not over. So again, I think they're trying not to worry people, but like I said, I remember them making this same mistake in '08, not wanting to worry people and keeping things from the people. If you get the opportunity to do so, please subscribe to Financial Times. You do have to pay for it. I think I pay like $1 a month or something like that. But they give me information that I'm not getting everywhere else when it comes to the banking industry, when it comes to economics. So that is that.